This Talking Flutes podcast is kindly sponsored by Trevor James Flutes, making life sound beautiful. You can show them some flute love by following them on Instagram at TJ Flutes, Trevor James Flutes on Facebook, and at trevorjamesflutes.com.
Hello, I'm Clare Southworth. This is Talking Flutes. Now, today's topic is a really interesting one, which many players are confused about: projection, resonance, and dynamics. But don't worry, help's on hand with my fellow collaborator today, the wonderful Liz Walker. Hello, Liz.
Hello, Claire.
So we're talking about some of the key areas of flute playing. So we've got our work cut out, I think.
I think we have. Indeed, we have.
Do you want to kick off?
Why not? I was thinking about projection and dynamics because in my world, which is slightly Baroque, we have a huge problem, of course, with projection in a way, because we have all sorts of difficulties with some of the notes that are particularly soft. They're what we call the forked notes. And because of those forked notes, we have to project using a lot of our resonances, which of course we do on modern flute too. I do a Flutes Online club with Sarah Murphy, and we had a singer in as our little guest for the last hour. And it's always intrigued me, Claire, that a human can stand on a stage and sing out into the Royal Festival Hall or in the Coliseum for E&O, and use their voices, their human voices, just to fill that space. I'm absolutely always been just fascinated on how they do that. These mere mortals. And so, yeah, it all sort of just all resonated with me, if you like, on how do we do that? How do we project into these ever increasingly larger and larger concert halls? I mean, in our Baroque world, we were playing to the king in his bedroom. No problem there. Now I've got, a couple of Matthew Passions coming up this Easter, and I'll look out into these vast cavernous concert halls and go, ah!
It's tricky, isn't it? Maybe we should start by what we're talking about with resonance. I mean, I think of it as being the fullness of our sound, and that we use our bodies to help create resonance and fullness. And it means that no matter what you're playing, we can project the sound that we want to project. When you go to flute conventions, you hear all these concerts and different flute players, and some flute players really project, but they're not playing loud. So it's not about loud, it's about the resonance of the sound. So yeah. I don't think any players should worry about trying to get bigger sounds. They should worry about trying to get a more resonant, more rounded sound.
Exactly. And I think there is a real definition there, because you can project a piano. I mean, we have to do that in the orchestra, don't we? There are plenty of solos where it's written pianissimo, and yet it's in an orchestra, so you can't play the same pianissimo that you might in your own room. And projecting the sound isn't particularly about, we're not talking about louds and softs here, because dynamics are a topic in sort of on top of resonance. And I think we do need to distinguish the difference between that. So I think you're absolutely right. When we talk about projection, we're talking about using our bodies and also using our imaginations. I think when we all came out of teaching online, we noticed a difference, that students were stopping projecting because they only needed to play to the screen, which was right in front of their nose. And when you get into a larger space, you have to actually resonate all the way out into that space. And that's it's a projection of yourself, isn't it, really, into that space, using your imagination, but also finding those resonances. And I think resonance, where does it come from? Where does it come from, Claire? Throat, probably?
Mouth, body, your lungs, your sinuses, and the instrument, of course.
The instruments, of course. Your core strength.
I'm thinking, I was just thinking about, you're saying that, when during COVID, when we were sort of all locked down, it reminds me of when I used to practice a lot in a very dead room. It was at college, actually. All the rooms were very heavily soundproofed. And so what you tended to do was force to get sound, which then meant the technique was completely wrong. And so you had to learn that sort of less was more and more was less, and not to force it. I mean, certainly when I was at college, it seemed that the emphasis was on bigger sounds, not beautiful sounds, just big sounds. And so we all tried a little bit too hard. It's a case of making sure that we don't get tense in order to create the sound, because tension stops the resonance. So releasing tension aids resonance.
I would say the word try harder, or the phrase try harder, is the biggest and fastest way to squash any resonance, which is easy to say and hard to do. But I think, exactly. As soon as you try, that effort will shut any resonance down. So keeping soft, keeping the throat open, that sort of idea of yawning, of being totally relaxed in order to project and to feel, I think, the distance. When I was talking to this lovely singer on our online group, he talked about an acting skill that he'd been working on with an opera company, of sending out the strings to each of the corners of the room. And for him, that meant the stalls and the amphitheatre, and right up to the furthest corner. And I loved that. And we explored that a little bit with my students at Wells Cathedral, who happened to be doing a concert in the cathedral. And I said to them, you have to encompass the whole building. You can't play just to the front row. But I think that works in every context, that you don't play to the front row. You encompass the front row, but you've also got to reach out to the back row. And I don't think there's any harm when you're practicing. I remember my junior college days. They used to have some teaching rooms under the road at Royal College of Music, and I went down there at a tender age, and my flute teacher used to talk about playing up and over the top of the Albert Hall, and you could really envisage that through this road, and trying to get your sound out to those corners. I put the word try in there again, which I don't like.
But what you're talking about is imagery. And imagery is so important in so many things that we do in terms of performance. And if when you're practicing, you can, like you're just saying, you can imagine that you're projecting your sound somewhere else, even if it's just into the garden or up the stairs, or just something. Imagine something where your sound is traveling. I used to like the thought of playing by a river, where you felt that the sound was taken away from you. So you're not trying, you're just letting it happen. I mean, the skill of creating resonance requires so much flexibility. It's the ability to change the shape of your mouth and the shape and the direction of the airstream, and totally dependent on your ears as well, which we haven't mentioned yet. And I'm just sort of trying to think of developing this fullness of sound. There's a lovely exercise I used to do, which was to help you feel the sound change, where if you, first of all, you were to sing a low A, and then you put your flute up and sing the A again over the mouthpiece whilst fingering the note A. Mm-hmm. And you feel there's a change. So you sing the A, you put your flute up, finger the A, you sing again over the mouthpiece, and there's a change. The flute starts to resonate. Now, if you repeat that again, and as you're singing the A with your flute up, fingering it, if you then play a G, the resonance goes.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing to try, that as soon as you've changed the fingering on the flute, there's a dullness that comes in. Uh-huh. So it's to do with your throat and your mouth and imagining that sound. So singing before you play is hugely important to help you create part of that resonance as well.
That's fascinating. I want to go and grab my flute right now, Claire. Thank you for that.
I remember doing it in masterclasses, and people would go, "Oh, wow.
Wow.
because
Yeah.
you can hear it, and that brings your ears in, so that you not only feel it, but you hear it as well. So
Singing is such a helpful tip anyway, isn't it? For phrasing, but definitely for finding the resonances.
yes, I always remember Robert Dick's exercises of throat tuning, because
Oh, yes.
there's that for every note there's a position for your throat. Like if you're singing, I mean, if you start, if the next time, our listeners, the next time you're practicing playing, if you just sing maybe an arpeggio, a simple arpeggio, and put your hand on your throat and feel the movement as you sing the arpeggio, and then play it and try and imagine the same and see if it helps. There's definitely a connection.
There's definitely a connection. And any of my flute students who dare say to me that they can't sing, ooh, that's a start again. Let's start the lesson from the beginning and get some singing going, because we're all singers. I've yet to meet a professional flute player who doesn't sing absolutely beautifully. And of course we sing well because it's so similar, the resonances, the throat, the pitching. I mean, when you start a piece, you have to pitch that note as if you're about to sing it, and it helps so much if you have that note in your head. Even if you haven't got perfect pitch, that's not a problem, but just knowing whether it's a high note, a low note, is going to resonate in a high tessiture or a low one. We are all singers for sure.
Absolutely. And the thing is that a lot of us are very embarrassed at first, and you've got to get rid of that embarrassment and just project it. And the thing is, when you change the sounds in your voice, that's the same technique that we use on the flute.
It's exactly
Singing different vowel sounds. It's the same on the flute, exactly the same. So the different shapes create different sounds, and then you do exactly the same when you're with your flute.
Yeah, and there is our answer to resonance. But if we move on to dynamics, I mean, it's very, very interesting that if I talk to anyone really, that it's the loud playing that seems to impress flute players more than the quiet playing. And I'm not quite sure when that came into our world, except I do know obviously that the invention from going into Baroque into modern flute was the inventor himself trying to expand the dynamics of the flute. So we have always had this desire to play loudly, but loud isn't always beautiful. It can be sometimes very over focused and quite sort of hard to listen to. I have been to recitals with my husband, who is not a flute player, and he said, "Do you actually like that sound?" And it's a really good question, because our desire should be, as Taffanel says, a sweet tone. He writes of his purchase of his first Louis Lot flute, as it happens, he was searching for a sweet tone, very resonant and sonorous, and retaining more of the qualities of the wooden flute. That's what he was looking for in his silver flute sound. He didn't want to lose the qualities of a wooden flute that can be so expressive. And I think sometimes we have lost sight of that sweet tone in the desire to be the one that plays the loudest.
Yes, and often those people who are playing the loudest have no differential. It's just loud and without contrast. So they play in monochrome rather than, multicolored.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if I go to a concert, and it doesn't matter whether I'm listening to a piano, a violin, or a singer, it's the contrasts that you come away with, because that's what resonates for you. If everything's full on loud, it's like, not seeing colors anymore. Everything's black or white.
Yeah, especially those wonderful pianissimos bring your audience to you. It's a bit like sometimes the best teachers in classes, schoolroom teaching, are the ones that never raise their voices, but they have some sort of intensity and directness just by talking quite quietly, never having to raise their voice. And when you play something that's really quiet, you're almost demanding something of your audience to go there with you, to listen better, harder. in order to experience what you're doing. The hard thing, of course, for us is playing a pianissimo that has substance rather than emptiness. So it's, making sure the harmonics are in tune. I think we all need to search for our parameters. So, depending on what piece you're playing, what's the loudest I should play in this piece and what's the softest? And as you go with earlier and earlier music, those parameters are getting more narrow, but they're still there.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. No, it's very interesting, of course, that a lot of Baroque music doesn't have any dynamics written in it. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to play with dynamic color. It's purely a sort of lack of dictionary, if you like. They didn't have a mezzo piano or a mezzo forte. It hadn't actually been sort of used yet. But, if you don't add those to your playing of early music, then it's just as difficult to listen to if it's all just one color. But it is difficult. I mean, I think more of our time, if you like, dedicated to being able to play in a wide dynamic range, introducing different colors and being aware of the huge change, if you like, in our bodies almost, of being able to play really loudly and really quietly. It should be something that is top of our list of warm-ups, if you like, or priorities as flute players, because I think there lies probably the technical challenges, but also the huge rewards.
I always link the colors with the dynamics, with the vibrato and the emotion.
Yes.
There are so many variables. It can help you if you create some sort of, again, back to imagery again, that depending on the piece you're playing and depending on the era in which it was written, that you create an image to fit that. So your mezzo forte might be, yes, moderately loud, but with a warmth and an energy, whereas your fortissimo might be a little harsher, stronger, making a statement, and your pianissimos will be something terribly delicate. So you can imagine scenes or colors or textures. I used to talk a lot about food in terms of, is this a really smooth chocolate sauce, or is it somehow got a little bit more texture, like with a peanut salad? I don't know. Peanut butter. Imagery is so important because it can just help you change something.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of players stay the same. They think they might be doing something, but they're not. And so you have to do something different in order to create a change. And sometimes you do something, you say, well, that doesn't work. That didn't sound so nice. So you try something different. Don't be afraid to experiment and to do something different and just see where it takes you.
And it is interesting, isn't it, when you record yourself and you really genuinely believe that those colors were there and that dynamic contrast.
Yep.
You listen back now, obviously things are a little bit compressed, so you can argue that it was all there, but it's just the recording device that didn't pick it up. But it's certainly worth listening, recording yourself, listening back, and just checking that actually that dynamic contrast really came across, because in terms of how much you have to change, I mean, coming back to that sort of physical difference, it should feel very different, I think, to producing a really loud note where all the air has just vanished out of you, to playing a really pianissimo note where you've got so much core strength just to contain that air so that it doesn't spin out too fast. And if you haven't really felt that extraordinary difference, then it's potentially not going to come across.
Also, talking about, the parameters anyone might have, most of the time we're sort of at, let's say, 80%.
Yeah.
80% forte, 80% or fortissimo, 80% pianissimo, so that we don't go to that point where it distorts. I remember something James Galway said some many years ago, it was like a general comment about the way flute playing was going, certainly in the UK. And he said, what's happened to the beauty in the sound? Where's all the beautiful sounds gone? It was just it was sort of loud. We're talking about, 40 years ago. And it made me stop and think. And yes, he was absolutely right. There was this sort of emphasis on how loud can you play? Can you play louder than the next person in your class or whatever? Nothing to do with keeping the quality of that sound and molding it and shaping it and just doing something with it. Dynamics, when you see them on the page, they're very one-dimensional.
Yes.
And it's up to us to change something to make them, not just one-dimensional, but multi-dimensional.
So my absolute hate, Claire, of the word cresque on the page. Cresque means nothing to me. I have to see those opening dynamics. It's such a dry word otherwise.
Yes, it is.
It doesn't stand out enough. And I think generally the dynamics don't stand out enough. And I think unless you are a composer yourself, or like I do a lot of arranging, and my lovely publisher, Wonderful Winds with Mel Orris, she always says to me, when you do that crescendo, Liz, exactly which note do you want it to stop on? And when you've agonized over exactly which note do I want that crescendo to go to, you then get really cross performers play with no crescendo at all, because you agonize over every detail when you're trying to write it down on the page. And we owe it, if nothing else, to the composers and to the arrangers to actually try and incorporate where they want that phrase to go to or away from, and just to completely ignore it. Apart from anything else, it's slightly disrespectful. That's going a bit over the top, but it should bring joy into the music if you at least try and reflect what's on the page. But coming back to the beauty of it, I wonder whether sometimes we do need to remember that we're not just playing to flute players. Because I think coming back to that sort of, why are we all trying to outplay each other with a harder, harsher, one-dimensional fortissimo, that might impress a flute player in the audience. But what about all of the musicians that we're playing to, or lovers of the music? And we sometimes overlook the music in our effort to be these technical, masterful, enormous players.
That's such a good point. That there's a lot of flute players who think to impress that you, yes, play loud, you play very fast, and the quality of the sound and the quality of the music making goes out of the window. So we should all be listening to other instrumentalists and singers, just so that we can hear how they project and how they communicate the music, how they shape it. What tools do they use to shape? So, for string players who haven't got the airstream, what are they doing to show the dynamic and the colors? I mean, how do they change the sounds on their instruments? And then whatever we learn, we try and bring then back into our own flute playing.
And I would go even further and suggest that you think about actors and orators, their use of pronunciation, which for us is maybe our articulation, but they use every inch of their pronunciation and their facial expressions. Everything is out there to get that excitement, to get that message, to get that drama across. And we can use the same techniques. I remember sitting in a Baroque orchestra. I won't mention the director's name, but he was very demanding. And we were right down on some nasty fault notes of Fs and A flats. And it was really hard to get this projection across right down there. And normally the choir's singing, so, we don't worry too much. But in this rehearsal, he wanted to hear this. And he was like, flutes, we need to really, really, really hear that. And my colleagues just whispered across to me, spit it out, dear, spit it out. And we were both spitting it out, just like you see orators, don't you, sort of spitting out their words. And that seemed to satisfy. So,
as you were talking a few minutes ago, you've reminded me of an exercise, and I couldn't remember the name of it. So I've just been going through my book, Mezza di Voce.
Ah.
Which is where you play a note, piano, and then crescendo through it, and then diminuendo away from it, just on
Yeah.
the one note, which is also a fabulous exercise for controlling where you're going and keeping the pitch the same.
Pitch. Yes.
The
Because
pitch
I
is
think
so
we're
important.
often very frightened. I know I am myself of that sort of exaggerated opening of the sound that ends up with the pitch going up. And I think we are right to be concerned about that. But doing those sorts of exercises where you don't need to necessarily, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful to always have a pianist sitting with us? But we don't have that luxury. But I think you can really hold on to a pitch if you're using that exercise, and really make sure that as you expand and open up the sound and the resonances, you're not shifting into a slightly higher key.
Maybe lots of people have electric keyboards these days,
Yes.
but if you were to play a chord on an electric keyboard with the sustain on, and then pick a note of that chord and do just that exercise to start piano, coming to mezzo forte or forte, back to piano, you can pick the dynamic. And then it aids that listening to see whether you're staying in the same pitch.
I think that's an invaluable exercise. And of course, also you've got these fixed tuning machines I use all the time, actually, just to fix a note, and then you can tune your thirds and your fifths and your octaves, and maybe use broken arpeggios, doing that exact crescendo decrescendo exercise just against a fixed pitch. That should help hugely with the confidence, because I think you want the confidence, don't you, on the day, to be able to crescendo and decrescendo and not lose that pitch.
Yeah. What we haven't mentioned is if your setup isn't right, or if you're not blowing in the right place, the resonance won't come because your harmonics are out of tune. If your harmonics are out of tune, there's no resonance.
Yeah.
So exercises for that would be bending notes, literally moving the airstream up and down using your jaw to move the airstream, and stopping where it feels in tune. And it's very easy to blow sharp without realizing it.
Yeah.
Or to blow flat, to cover too much or uncover too much. And everyone has to just experiment themselves. I talked about that earlier on, to see what they're doing with where they're blowing and where the head joint is, and if the cork's in the right place. There are lots of things to check, aren't there?
There are too many things, possibly. And of course, a lot of tension is sometimes held in our embouchures, in our lips, which stops them from moving. And I think it's really important. You mentioned it earlier, Claire. There's sort of the concept of flexibility. We need to have flexibility, and to have flexibility, we've got to be quite open and relaxed. So wiggling the jaw around, wiggling the lips around, making the face whole, the whole face move. I do remember though, very early mornings, we would be traveling with my flute quartet, Festive Flutes from Guildhall days. And we'd not have time to warm up. It would be 7 in the morning, and we'd sit on these tube trains making these silly faces. But it really does help to get the face moving, and to find where everything is. And so many days we wake up, don't we? And we might have a bit of a cold, or you've eaten something that makes your lips just feel not quite in the right place. I'm sure we all know what we're talking about with that. You have to get things moving and keep them flexible, because certainly, if you start to get a bit tense before a performance, for example, they're all the things that need to stay relaxed, stay loose. We've talked about not being able to project the sound if we've got tension in our throat, and all of these things just need to, if as much as possible, be kept in our mind so that on the performance day, we've got that palette of colors and that huge variety in our sound and dynamic control, which all really comes down to flexibility in that moment, and the confidence to be able to keep shifting things and to be experimenting.
So relax, flexibility, and all the sort of the fine detail we need in our performances will only come if we are relaxed and we have practiced the flexibility. It's all so important. So let's have a quick recap. I mean, we could talk for hours about all these things, but if we do just a quick recap. So we're talking about to play in as relaxed a state as possible, not totally relaxed because we'd fall over, because tension aids our resonance. And the skill of resonance requires us to be flexible, which we'll get when we're relaxed.
Yeah.
And we need to experiment a lot more with finding the fullness of sound by experimenting with the shape of your mouth and using your whole body as well as your flute as the resonator, and to try different exercises to try and find that resonance.
Yeah, and to keep the creative spirit, to keep aware that actually we're looking for beauty in our projections. It's not just about how loudly we can play.
No. And, you know, once somebody starts to use dynamics, the music comes alive.
Definitely.
And I think we can all, you know, when you go to a concert, you know, ask yourself some questions. I always just say, you know, do you feel you've been moved? You know, moved to tears because it's so beautiful, moved to laugh because it's meant to make you smile, and you hear the beauty, moved you out of the hall because it's so bad. And what's you hearing? Are you hearing a piece in Technicolor? Are you hearing? Can you create images from what you're hearing, or does it all sound the same? And if you heard a whole recital with all different pieces from different eras, do they sound different? Does the style change? Does the method of playing change according to whatever piece you're playing? And if you can't get to a concert, then listen to recordings. Listen to Liz here playing her Baroque flute, and then listen to someone play maybe a classical flute, same thing with Liz, and then something more contemporary. Ask yourself, okay, what are the differences? What changes? And then use that to help you in your practice.
And trust yourself. Trust yourself to play really quietly and really loudly. I think let's go that 100%, Claire, this week, and not stop at 80%.
Yeah, if that's what the music demands. But if every forte you see is your 100%, then you've got nothing for fortissimo, or nothing with the composers put, you know, aggressively or strongly or with great force, whatever it might be. You've got to save that little bit for that particular moment. So there's a lot there for everyone to think about. Liz, thank you so much.
And I'm going to go and sing and blow into my flute at the same time. Thank you for that one.
That's brilliant. Many thanks, and thanks to our listeners. We hope we've sort of given you some food for thought. And if you have any questions, do write into us, flutepodcast@gmail.com, or you can message us on our designated Facebook page called Talking Flutes, or on Twitter and Instagram @Flute or @Clare Flute. So many thanks for listening. Thanks, Liz, and we'll talk again soon.
Great. Goodbye.
Bye.
Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.